at another time to talk about Pheasant Branch. But we wanted to present the findings of the study to the commission before we went to our third public information meeting for this watershed study. So we wanted to inform you all before we put this out to the general public. So with that, Lauren does have a presentation to share. Does she have the ability to share your screen?
I can stop sharing. Not certain how to allow her to do that.
I think.
Yeah, it's not letting me.
Yeah. You disabled. It said the host has disabled participant screen sharing, Rich.
Okay.
I don't know how to.
I don't either. We'll see if we figure this out. If anybody's got insight.
There's usually a little button at the bottom of the screen that it's like a little shield and it says something like security.
I think I've turned it who can share on.
Yep, now it's letting me do it.
Excellent, thank you for that.
All right, so can everybody see the screen that shows a full screen presentation?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
wonderful.
Very legible.
Okay, excellent news. All right, so as Caroline mentioned, I am Lauren Striegel. I am an engineer with the City of Madison. I work with Caroline and Janet and Greg, both of whom are here. And I'm going to give you a brief update on the Striegers Mendota Watershed Study. This presentation was adapted from one that we have been sharing internally with agencies. And so it contains a little bit more background than just a straightforward sharing of solutions. So I know that a lot of you are very involved in the water resources kind of community in Madison. Many of you may have seen a presentation like this. It's very similar to one that I gave at NASICA earlier this year. So apologize if some of this information is a little redundant for you, but I did leave it in case others were not as familiar. So let me see if I can get this going. All right, so an overview of this presentation. First off, I'm going to give some background on just the phasing and the schedule that we have planned for watershed studies throughout the city, including those that we have already started. A little bit of an overview of the process and what this study actually looked like from kind of initiation through where we are today. And included in that will be a couple anecdotal lessons learned, some preliminary proposed solutions for the Striegers Mendota Watershed only, and that's probably what most of you are here to see tonight. These are the solutions that have kind of been given to us in draft form that we are going to hopefully move towards sharing with the public in May here. And then we've got some time, I'm sure, for comments and questions. So really briefly, for those that aren't super aware, the City of Madison does have a kind of comprehensive citywide watershed study program. It was put into place in its current form after the floods of August 2018. The first studies bid out were done in kind of early 2019. And the 4 studies that started this all out were the Striegers Mendota Watershed Study, the Madison Pheasant Branch Watershed Study, Spring Harbor, and Winger West. And all of those were watersheds that were hit particularly hard in August of 2018, although they were by no means the only ones that suffered quite a lot of damages during those storms. As you can see from this does, it spans 8 years as of right now. So this is a long-term project for the city. We are committed to getting all the way through it, but it is certainly not something that's happening overnight for us. So to just give you a little bit more detail on what those round 1 watershed studies looked like, 3 of them were bid out and were largely completed by consultants. One was done in-house. Caroline Berger led that in-house effort on the Madison Pheasant Branch Watershed Study. The Spring Harbor Watershed Study was completed by AE2S and led within the city by Jojo O'Brien. Stricker's Mendota Watershed and Winger West Watershed studies were both done by Brown and Caldwell. I led the city side of the Stricker's Mendota Watershed study, and then Phil Gabler in our office led the city side of the Winger West Watershed study. Ooh, that was an animation. So this is kind of a look at the schedule, and what this slide is really trying to get across is just how long these things actually take. Why is it going to take us 8 years to get through all of the different watersheds in the city? Well, this is why. We started this whole process in 2019, and we initially expected to finish it up about a year later in 2020. What we actually found is that there was an additional year in there. Now, this is not something that we're finding in future watershed studies. A lot of this was kinks having to be worked out. Most notably, we had an issue with the software we started out with. Some of you may be aware that we started this whole process in InfoSwim and found about halfway through the building of the existing conditions model that that wasn't a great software to use. And so we had to have our consultants that were working in round one switch all of their models into a totally different modeling framework. We went to XP Swim. So it did pad the schedule by about a year. We are hoping and planning at this point to finish up this first round of watershed studies this summer or fall. So a little bit about what this process actually looked like in practice. How did we set up a model in for this round one study? So this is kind of an overview of the Stricker's Mendota Watershed. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It's about a third Middleton and a third Madison. It's kind of an interesting watershed, not only because it does straddle those two municipalities, but because it's basically two independent or quasi-independent watershed. There's a chunk of this watershed that does drain to Stricker's Pond, and in Madison at least, a smaller part that drains to Tiedemann that we generally group together. But then there's another chunk that drains straight to Lake Mendota. So it's kind of unique in that way, and you'll see that a lot more clearly when we get to the solutions part of this presentation. So what actually makes it up? Well, within the city of Madison only, there's a lot that goes into this model. There's a lot in the watershed. I should say that this is probably the smallest and on paper, the simplest of these first four watersheds that we looked at. And yet still, Brown and Caldwell, when they were putting this together, had to enter in about 4,500 feet of open channels, 8 detention ponds, 81 little sub watersheds that they broke this whole larger watershed up into. And you can see from this that they did kind of a lot more detail on the city of Madison side as we were trying to get a much tighter breakdown of where problem areas were within the city of Madison. And then lastly, about 41,000 feet of storm sewer underground. So we didn't want to have our consultants just go out and try to build a model with absolutely no background information. So we gave them some data to start with, of course. The first thing that we did was collect a whole bunch of citizen reports. So after that August 2018 storm, we put into place a really extensive flood reporting data collection program. And we gathered citizen reports within this watershed alone everywhere you see those little blue dots. We also sent our surveyors out. We provided Brown and Caldwell a whole bunch of data from our records, but our data isn't perfect. It's far from perfect. And so in situations where we didn't have great data, where Brown and Caldwell was very concerned that the data that we did have might not be good enough to get really good answers for us, we sent our surveyors out to get a little bit more information. Third, we scheduled some on-site focus group visits. I'll talk a little bit more about this when I run through pretty quickly our public outreach effort, but this was a new way that we found of getting in touch with people and getting really good on the ground information. So prior to COVID, when we were still all able to meet face-to-face for these first four watersheds, we did actually have our consultant team go out, and Jim is very familiar with this. I think he was the one person that attended all four of these. But we had our consultant team go out, as well as some city staffers on each of these projects, and talk with neighbors at these sites that we knew flooded due to very specific issues. And we could see them go up to their house and point out, this is how high the water came during this event. Obviously, we were focused, as were most of the people that came to these, on August 2018, but a lot of the people that came to these focus groups visits had been there for quite a while and were able to provide more context than just one event, which was supremely helpful. And we didn't think that we could get this kind of information using the old kind of outreach method. So this was a really great fit for this type of study. Then lastly, all this anecdotal data is great, but it's tough to calibrate a model only to that and feel very good about it. So we worked with the USGS to set up several monitoring stations for precipitation and for stage data at kind of key sites within the watershed. And we left those in place throughout the summer of 2019 so that we could collect data for bigger events and allow Brown and Caldwell to calibrate their model to that. This is just a quick synopsis of some of the calibration data, just to kind of give you an idea of what this looks like. I won't spend too much time on this because this is a group that is, I'm sure, much more familiar with calibration data than some of the other groups that have looked at this. But this is just an example from the Strickers Pond gauge that we installed for one of the calibration events. This just gives you an idea of what the actual XP swim model looked like once it was constructed for existing conditions. Like I said, this was one of the simpler watersheds, but it was by no means simple. This was a big model with a whole bunch of different nodes, different subbasins, all of that. And you can see just how complex it is based on this screenshot. I did want to touch just really briefly on the public input process that we did. Like I mentioned, this was kind of a new public input process that was developed just for this watershed study program. So we laid out a framework wherein we would have at least 3 main public input meetings, as well as some individual focus group meetings, like I discussed, on site to really get a breadth of public input. So we started by giving a very broad, what is a watershed? What is a watershed study? Why are we looking at your watershed type of meeting in early 2019. We then met with our focus groups on site later that year, kind of at the transition between summer and fall. We gave the neighborhood a view of our existing conditions model in early 2020, which was interesting. This was about, I believe, a week, if that, before we all got sent home completely for about a year. So we did manage to squeeze this one in under the wire, and it was an in-person meeting. And we were able to talk to residents about what our maps looked like and whether they matched what they had seen in past events. And then lastly, we're going to have a public input meeting, like I said, in May, so in about a month. And that's where we're going to try to share the solutions that Brown and Caldwell has developed for this watershed with members of the public. And of course, that will be a virtual meeting. We also have a website for this watershed study, as we do for all of our watershed studies, and I've just put the address there. These are updated regularly by both the project manager as well as by our public information officer, Hannah Moholnitsky. This is just a brief synopsis. Not only did we do all of these PIMs, but there was a lot of media done. You can see Phil Gabler from our office speaking to a television crew. It kind of gives me hives, but he and Hannah have done a whole lot of speaking to the media about this and getting the word out about what we're doing and why we're doing it. As well, we also have a new podcast that Hannah has been kind of pioneering, that she has really pushed flooding issues in that podcast in an attempt to kind of reach a different audience that we might have in the past. So this is, I'm sure, the best part of this presentation. As we started to get into the existing conditions model and getting flood inundation maps and realizing that we wanted to share them with the public, we spoke to our legal department, our attorneys, and said, can we share all of these inundation maps? And they went, we really need to provide some context because these are pretty technical maps, and we want to make sure that whoever's looking at these isn't taking them as gospel. These are models. These are not predictive of anything. And we don't want to be in a position where somebody down the line floods or doesn't flood and says, well, your model said I would or wouldn't, and I was making these decisions based on that information. So I hate to actually come back to this, but because I am going to show maps, I have to go through the legal disclaimer. I will summarize it. Essentially, it says exactly what I just said. So these are predictive tools. They're trying to give us an idea of what flooding looks like. I'm sorry, they're not predictive tools. The attorneys would kill me for that. They're kind of planning tools. And so these are not intended to let you identify a house and say it definitely will flood if this rain happens, and it definitely won't if this other rain happens. They're just to give us an idea of general patterns. And the city of Madison, of course, assumes no liability if somebody misuses them. So this is a great big map of the existing conditions, 1% chance or 100-year event inundation throughout the first 4 watersheds that we studied. So you can kind of see Striker's watershed, just the Madison portion of the watershed, not the Middleton portion. Up here at the top, you can also see, kind of taking up the most space over here, the Pheasant Branch watershed. Here's Spring Harbor, and then of course down here is Winger West. And we did standardize our inundation maps. We spent a lot of time thinking through what would be the most useful division of depths for us as well as for the public to kind of help us all figure out whether we were or weren't meeting our flood goals. And I'll go through those really briefly in a slide or two. But all of these depths were standard and kind of helped us visually latch onto that information pretty quickly. Just to go through what we did have our consultants look at, we kind of went through the whole range of events. So everything from the 1 year through the 100 year. And then we get asked the question a lot, well, are you considering climate change? And whether the fact that the 100 year 20, 30 years from now is almost certainly not going to be the 100-year event that you're looking at today. And yes, we definitely know that this is a possibility, if not a probability, but it's hard to quantify something that we can't predict. And so the way that we have chosen to address this at this point is to take a look at each of these watersheds under the 500-year event. Lastly, we did have our consultants model the August 2018 event, and we did that using rainfall data that a professor at the UW, Professor Dan Wright, put together for us based on radar from that event. So we got a really good spread in areas that we didn't necessarily have rain gauges set up at the time. And we largely did this because this is a great event that people remember and were able to very quickly respond to us when we showed them the maps and say, yeah, this happened. Yeah, this didn't so much happen. You should adjust this. So briefly, what were we actually trying to evaluate when we were looking at these maps? They're very pretty, but how are they useful? Well, we put together a whole list of kind of targets that we were trying to hit. And use this to evaluate in each watershed and in each place within each watershed, whether or not we were robust enough, whether our infrastructure was robust enough to withstand flooding. So for the 10% chance or the 10-year event, we usually like to convey that within our underground storm sewer system. So what we wanted to make sure was that we weren't seeing surcharging out of the storm sewer system past some nominal surcharging as water gets into inlets. We didn't want to see significant surcharging onto the roadway. For the 25-year event, we were really focused, or the 4% chance event, we were really focused on maintaining emergency vehicle access. So we wanted to make sure that larger emergency vehicles could still get through roads, and particularly main arterial roads like Gammon in the Striker's Mendota Watershed during that 4% chance event. And our criteria there was that we'd have 0.2 feet or less of ponding at the center line of the road. For the 1% chance event, we were targeting having no structure flooding. And we want to have all of our greenway crossing culverts sized such that those crossings can carry the 100 event without overtopping the road. Then lastly, for the 500-year event, we know that that is huge, and most, if not all, of our infrastructure is not sized for that, and in a lot of cases cannot be upsized for that, especially in developed areas. So what we were looking to get there was just safe conveyance of overflow during that 500-year 0.2% chance event. This is just very briefly what we did once we had all of these existing conditions models and how we took those to a proposed solutions place. So this is a really quick rundown of what we did. Essentially, once we had those existing conditions models and knew where our problem areas were, we had the consultants meet with the engineering staff internally in the city to just kind of brainstorm ideas. Nothing was really considered off the table. We wanted to look at just what it would take for each of these problem areas to kind of meet those goals that we went through a slide ago. Then our consultants went through, refined the ideas, started to conceptually size all of these mitigation measures, all of these flooding solutions, and then went and took those solutions and plugged them into the model. And then they began some iterations. So kind of back and forth with engineering staff. What does the model say? Are we meeting what we want to meet? Do you want us to keep going? Are we getting unreasonably expensive or just into something that we can't actually build? And this continued as we kind of spoke with, internally with our agencies. This continued until we arrived at a set of solutions for each of these watersheds that we felt were buildable, were reasonable, and were something that we could kind of present to agencies and to the public. So now this is the good stuff. Thanks for sitting through kind of the background. What did we actually find as far as preliminary solutions for the Mendota Watershed? So I mentioned before that this watershed is kind of interesting because it is basically two watersheds. So this is just a visual of what that actually looks like in practice. So that red line there divides the Strickers-Tiedemanns watershed from the Lake Mendota watershed. And this was kind of a fun one to actually design solutions for because it was very easy to split our main gray infrastructure, our kind of pipes and ponds infrastructure solutions into one for each side. So I will go through both of those. The one that I will spend more time on and will come second and is probably of the most interest to this commission is the Longmeadow Relief Sewer. That was the West Lobe solution for the Strickers-Tiedemanns area. One that, that the city of Madison really just affects our property and that the city of Madison is actually moving forward with into design is improvements to the Mendota Grassman Greenway. So I'll go over that one first because it is completely contained within Madison property. So what was really important in this area, which is in the eastern part of this watershed, was to prevent structure flooding during the 1% event. There are several condos out here. Right here, this is the Hickory Hollow Condo Association that have reported a lot of flooding in the past. In addition, the Julia Street and Julia Court area has also reported a lot of flooding. Now, some of that is due to groundwater, but a lot of it is due to surface water. So when we asked Brown and Caldwell to look at this area, what they found pretty quickly was that this greenway, which is very wooded, not very well graded, it was kind of ripe for improvement. And so what they ended up proposing was essentially lowering and better sloping this greenway and then increasing the culvert capacity underneath the main roads that cross it to try to just get water as quickly as we can out of this greenway and to Lake Mendota downstream. So what this looks like in the western part of the greenway is essentially improving that cross section within the greenway and adding in a new parallel culvert right next to the existing box culvert that's in place there. Downstream of that It looks like, again, improving that greenway cross section, lowering it, reducing the roughness through there, and then replacing some old kind of corrugated metal culverts with higher capacity twin box culverts downstream. So on the western side of this, what Brown and Caldwell found was the most efficient solution here was to install a parallel 60-inch or 5-foot relief sewer that essentially runs right adjacent to an existing City of Madison storm sewer, which is shown in orange here, and will essentially cut off the hydraulic connection here at Harvest Hill from the old storm sewer and divert all of that water through this new 5-foot diameter storm sewer. It will discharge into Stricker's forebay, as does the existing storm sewer, and then of course into Stricker's pond. Now, one thing that Brown and Caldwell recognized and that the City of Madison recognized is that this would involve conversations with the City of Middleton. Obviously, Middleton is downstream of this solution. It is right downstream of Stricker's pond. And so we are aware that this might involve parallel conversations where we talk about improving the outlets to Stricker's pond and Tiedemann's pond, just to make sure that we are mitigating as much as we can any potential negative effects to the City of Madison or the City of Middleton. Brown and Caldwell did find when they modeled this that there were pretty negligible effects due to this on the Stricker's pond water level surface, or water surface level, but we know that these conversations have to be had. Lastly, I just want to take a minute to touch on something that is really important, if sometimes overlooked. These big regional solutions are great and very, very critical, but they're nothing if we can't actually get the water to where it needs to go to actually take advantage of these solutions. And so Brown and Caldwell kind of looked at this watershed and noted everywhere that local pipes need to be upsized to get the most benefit out of our big regional solutions. And so everything you see in red, barring the border of the watershed itself, is all pipe that eventually has to be upsized. And this is a multi-year, probably multi-decade process. We will get these projects done as we do resurfacing projects, as we do reconstruction projects, but this is not going to happen overnight. Even if we were to install these big regional solutions tomorrow, this is an ongoing process for each and every one of these watersheds. So what are we doing next? Aside from PIM3, where we present all this to our people in the public, well, this is kind of an outdated slide. This does mention that we still have to meet with agencies and stakeholders. We did that. We did have to have a whole bunch of conversations with kind of other agencies within the city that were really concerned about this. Parks being the big one. We had to go through anywhere we proposed detention in one of our parks and talk to them. Stakeholders, that includes the City of Middleton, and that's why we're here tonight, is to go through this and see what your concerns are and to take those into account as we move towards finalizing all of this. So Brown and Caldwell, once we complete this conversation, once we go through PIM3 and get some input from the public, Brown and Caldwell will then move on to writing their final report. And we want to make sure that every stakeholder's voice is represented in that final report. So the last step, it's one bullet on here, but there's a wealth of information in there, is begin implementing solutions. So like I said, for this watershed, we are moving forward with the Mendota Grassman Greenway improvements, but a lot of these solutions we're just starting to try to figure out when we could even start thinking about implementing them. So even though it looks simple and it's kind of written easily here, that is going to be, again, a multi-year, if not multi-decade process to try to bring all these solutions into reality. So with that, I am finished. If you have any questions, I can answer them, Greg or Janet can answer them, or Caroline can answer them. We're all kind of at your disposal. Whoever is the best equipped to do so will jump in.
Well, thank you, Lauren. I appreciate the speech here or whatever this is, and you did a great job with it.
Yeah, thanks. That was good. Is there any questions you have for Lauren? I have one question. I didn't say anything about decreasing the amount of water by infiltration or something like that. It looks like most of your solutions are transporting more efficiently the flood peaks. So in the end result, it's like Mendota is going to get more water faster.
That is an excellent point. I'm sorry, was that Warren speaking? It's a little
Yes.
hard sometimes for me to
Yes.
see, but so that ties in really nicely to a part of this study that I didn't speak so much about. So there is a component of this that is more green infrastructure focused. We call it the volume control infrastructure portion. Caroline is the lead on that. So essentially in parallel to all of these solutions, Caroline is taking a look in the Pheasant Branch watershed, and we're also having consultants do this in a couple other select watersheds, namely the Winger West watershed, as well as the Willow Creek watershed, at how we could implement a large-scale green infrastructure program in the city of Madison and how that might affect some of these proposed solutions. So that study is still more in its infancy and we don't have data on that tonight, but that's definitely something that we're looking at. And we will have more information on that to come, especially as Caroline starts to wrap up that Pheasant Branch watershed study.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Are there any other questions? If not, thank you, Lauren. Appreciate it. So the next item then is Pheasant Branch Stream Bank Bridge and Trail design. I think, is that right, from MSA is going to make a presentation on looking at freeboard? Is that right, Rich?
Yep. And I did see the Rain was online, so if I can help her out or let her share however she wishes to.
Rain, up to you.
Thank you again for having me. Excited here to provide an update to everyone as it's been a few months. So I don't know, Rich, do you by chance have the memo that you can pull up or do you want me to share? Maybe. Because I can definitely try to share here. Looks like I can. So back in December, we had a good discussion on our analysis thus far on the various bridges along the corridor. And what we were able to do then was take some past study information on the corridor for the bridges and kind of get you some approximate and rough ideas as to what we were looking for as we look forward to designing and setting the bridges on new abutments and what elevations they would need to be set to. And so when we left that meeting, the direction was, at a minimum, we wanted to make sure that we got the bridge abutments, that bottom low chord 1 foot above the 100-year storm event. And then also looking to consider that maybe what would 1 more foot above that elevation look like for the various bridges. And so with that, over the last month here, we were able to work with Cardno and the model and get our information updated into it for each of the bridge locations and do our analysis even further with actual data from the corridor now. And so what we did was the first thing that we looked at was setting the bridges at that 1 foot above, so that low chord elevation. And so if you remember, the bridges are that arched frame. I'll actually try to zoom in a little bit more. They're the arches. And so what we're looking at is getting that 1 foot at the lowest point of the bridge above that 100-year storm event. And so with that, we were able to look at all the bridges except for number 4, which we need to get the final survey information in, which we are working on this week and working on that final modeling piece. So I know that one bridge is missing from this data set. but all of the other ones are included. And we were able to set all the bridges as such, as shown in the plans that were attached. And we looked at how we can tie in the side slopes for the trail up to it, and what would that look like? Because last time we talked about several different options as to how the trail would tie into the bridges when they're set up this much higher. Then, so with that, I probably will quickly jump into, we did go down the path of trying to look at that additional 1 foot above this elevation to get 2 feet above, and what that would look like and what that storm protection would be. Unfortunately, the model was only built out to the 100-year event. So we were able to kind of look at what 1 more foot would do, but not really give you quite the guidance as to what that storm event would look like, and what that protection level would be, I should say. So with that though, with going up 1 more foot in this design, you can already see that with us trying to tie in these bridges at the elevations that they are, this 8.33% is basically our maximum slope that we really want to go to with tying and feathering in the trail to the bridges. So if we were to set the bridges 1 more foot up, it would really draw out that connection to connect into the existing trail. And the one thing I want to point out is that in all of, except for 1 bridge, all of the bridges will still at the 100-year event have some sort of level of bypass flow. So you have the flow going under the bridge, but then the bypass flow, and you can see the water line going across here, will go around the bridge, across the trail or in other areas to get around to convey that water. And so obviously if we push the bridges up 1 more foot, our concern is then you are blocking off and damming off more of that bypass area and forcing more water to funnel underneath the bridge, causing scour further upstream and downstream of the bridges themselves. So once we start looking at that and understanding that that might not be the best and most cost-effective option at that point, we've come back to our thoughts as to the recommendation we're providing in the memo that was attached in your packets, which is to just get the bridges that 1 foot above the 100-year event, because you are safely still conveying the water through that area. We're adequately protecting the abutments that are being built there, and still able to tie in the trail connections at an at-grade connection versus having to put in boardwalk to those connections. Are there any questions so far?
So your recommendation is to have 1 foot above the 100-year flood?
Correct, correct. We felt that that was the most beneficial and cost-effective option in this case. And you're safely able to convey that water. You know, you got that extra, you know, by being 1 foot above, you do have that extra level of protection still with the bridges themselves, especially even in the center, you have even more protection under the arch, but it'll get that debris through. But, you know, then we're also not damming off and filling more in the floodplain. That's our other concern. And I mentioned that in the memo, that obviously the higher we go, the more fill we're bringing to set these bridges. And then we need to balance that somewhere throughout the corridor itself. And that is something we'll be working closely yet with Cardno on to ensure that we're balancing that cut and fill overall with the overall project.
Okay, it makes sense to me.
So when we had talked back in December, we had provided some rough costs as to what these options, what we're doing would look like. And with this recommendation, I had provided kind of that similar same chart shown in here with updated costs based on the numbers now that we do have. And when you look at all these bridges, and we did add in the cost for riprap and railing, because we are going up so steep, we will need some additional railing coming off the bridges for safely keeping people on the trail leading up to the bridges. And obviously there's the riprap to protect the abutments. And so when we spoke on the cost in December, we noted that, you know, originally the city had spent around $70,000 to repair the bridges to get them back to the state that they're in right now. And we recognized at a base cost minimum, you would need to spend $522,000 to set the existing bridges back on their abutments. And that was with a concrete abutment on top of helical piles was our recommendation. Now that we know roughly where these bridges are going to be set with the 1 year, 100-year 1 foot protection, that with those costs and the riprap and the railing that's needed, it would be around the 717, so roughly just under $200,000 of additional cost to obviously get the bridges up above the 100-year for that additional protection, which overall is very similar in cost than I think that we presented last time, not a whole lot more, and you're getting that benefit from raising them up. Are there any other questions so far?
Yeah, this is Jim. Just wanted to clarify, make sure I understand that 8% slope you looked at. Does that exceed ADA requirements?
So when it comes to trails, we actually can exceed that 5% slope because of the terrain and the topography and tying it in. So we can actually get up to that maximum percent. You actually can go higher than 8.33, but we don't recommend it.
Yeah.
If we can get away from that, because 8.33 can be pretty steep already.
Yep.
But in this case, and we can apply the guidelines and requirements, we can do the 8.33% as we tie into those bridges.
So that is what we would be at what your recommendation is. Is that true? Is that correct?
Correct. If that wasn't acceptable to have that steep of slope, we probably would be looking at doing some sort of boardwalk at a lesser slope to tie in. Because if we were to fan out that slope and lessen it, we're going to be tying out further, which obviously then reduces the capacity of the bypass flow, which then we might be wanting to look at the need to do the boardwalk, which would allow the water to go underneath it, but obviously adds a fair amount of cost to the overall project.
I guess I wanted to hear from Mark. I assume the parks people are more in tune to this situation, if that 8% is acceptable to the parks people or not.
Given the length that 8% would be at, that is what we're okay with. I know, like, if you were to go over by PPD on the South Fork Trail that goes up behind there, goes up that hill, that is pretty similar in terms of percentage slope. And then we've got little flat areas before it goes into that slope again. So for that certain distance out of that 8.3, yeah, we would be fine with that. It's definitely preferable, like Rain said, than to have a boardwalk. That's for sure.
Yeah, right. Is this true for each bridge crossing, or just only certain ones that we'd be at that?
I think actually all of them have some level of that 8.33 tied to them.
Okay.
Do note though that the bridges themselves, because they are arch bridges, once from one end to the center of the arch is actually 8.33% too. So the bridges actually have that same slope. So we're just matching into that.
I know biking up an 8% slope can get, that's a climb if it's too far. Okay.
With that, I just had a couple other points. Like I said, we're gonna continue to we're working on bridge number 4 to model it, to understand where that one needs to be set, and hopefully we'll have that information hopefully by the end of this week. And so that all impacts, in general, once you provide, if you're going to go with the recommendation we're providing, we'll have to work with Cardinal to balance the cut and fill within the corridor to make sure that what we're filling for the bridges, and what they're cutting for their restoration project balances, and we'll need further review of that. We did also, I just had a note in here, wetlands. We did reach out to the DNR. We've gotten confirmation from a desktop review that there is no further delineation needed based on this work. We'll continue to work with them though on the other permits and what else is needed within the project.
So does that conclude your presentation, Reen?
It does, unless somebody has any other questions. I wanted to keep it short and sweet for you.
Yeah, we appreciate that. So Rich, what we're looking for is a motion for approval of this concept.
Yes, that's correct.
So essentially, then the staff recommends the commission directs the proposed design of 1 foot freeboard from the 100-year flood as presented to move forward with final design and plans for the project. So we need a motion to that extent.
I'll move. Ken Potter.
Potter move.
Do we have a second?
Ramsey will second.
Okay, we have a motion, and a second. So all in favor of approval?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And the motion's carried. Okay, thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Warren, if I could interrupt, we did not approve the minutes. If we get,
Oh, yeah, forgot about that.
that's okay.
Let's go
That's
back.
what I'm here for.
Yeah, let's go back and have a motion for approval of minutes.
Move approval of the minutes. Ramsey.
We have a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, we have a motion for approval and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Okay, the next item then is Graper Pond elevation control. So Rich, do you want to introduce that, where we are on that?
Sure. We did have last time at a meeting, we paused the permitting or continued permit application for the design that MSA had provided us due to some objections about from the Friends of Pheasant Branch and invasive species and maintaining that as a kettle pond. So we paused that for a little bit. After that water resources meeting, we did have another meeting with a couple of the members where we had some discussion about master plan, which Herb Garden pointed out that we didn't consider during the last meeting, and the elevation that pre-existed of 904. So we're pretty close to that elevation with the designs that we have in front of us from MSA. Our question really becomes, do we want to continue to follow the master plan and restore that pond elevation to the previous 902 or 904 from the master plan, Graper Pond master plan that Ken Psyche?
I think one thing that happened after last meeting is we became aware of the master plan, and the recommendation from Water Resources to the master plan was that be operated as a prairie pothole, which makes it different than was proposed before, which would have been a flood retention pond. So I think as in that meeting you referred to, I think we agreed that we were going to operate it as a prairie pothole. And I guess we should reaffirm that from Water Resources, as that's how we want the pond to operate. Is there a discussion on that?
Can I chime in here, Warren?
Who are
This
you?
is Eric.
That's Eric.
Sorry.
Okay, Eric, sure, yeah.
In that 2006 master plan, I think it recommends operating it at the existing 904.2 elevation, but it also references a historic overtopping elevation of 902.2. And I don't think it gives any reasoning for trying to maintain that higher elevation. It's just kind of accepts it. So I just wanted to point that out.
Well, it should be some discussion what was the difference between a 904 and 902 mean. At 902, we have more discharge going out of the pond probably into through Misty Valley and into Pheasant Branch, right? So if we had at 904, we'd have a little bit of storage after evaporation, lowered it below the 904, we'd have some storage built into it.
I think theoretically, yes, depending on the year.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel about that, Ken?
But I don't know. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other on that.
I'll jump in here. We had a extensive field walk today, Ken Potter and I, with some friends of Pheasant Branch representatives to reacquaint ourselves to the area. You know, walked it from east to High Road all the way up to the Graper Pond outlet. It's actually down quite a, and if anybody's looked at it recently, it's back down. I don't know how many feet, but there must be some infiltration occurring there, and or ET, of course. But I think the bottom conclusion is the main concern of, if I understand it correctly, and we have some representatives here tonight from the Friends. Hans is the co-president. Concern was, not having frequent flows, not operating that pond with frequent flows whenever we, felt, I don't know, some criteria was requiring it into the system downstream. Secondly, I heard from the Friends the idea that they thought flow that does leave it ought to go through the Misty Valley system just to help reduce some of the contaminants, sediment, phosphorus, et cetera, and material from getting into the Pheasant Branch area. And our discussion at the end was looking at a 904 spillway elevation without the option to mechanically lower the pond further. So if it's set at 904, then if the pond does lower through various processes, ET, et cetera, fine, that's good. That'll be storage for the next storm that comes around. But the concern was allowing for mechanical or pumping or, other ways to reduce the pond from that 904 number, more frequently, to have more discharge downstream. And I think I'm being accurate on that, but I would like to hear from, I guess I'll ask Hans if he's got anything to say based on our discussion that we had this morning.
I guess we could have one person speak from the Friends, not have everybody.
Right.
Yeah, I think we just have Herb and myself here representing the Friends, and our position, and we provided this to you in our memo in January, is that we were supportive of plans that have no new discharge from the current berm elevation towards Pheasant Branch Conservancy. So we feel that moving forward with maintaining the berm with a passive discharge at 904.2 or 904, whichever that is, and conveyance through the Misty Valley system without any sort of bypass, that's something that we could support and find that was in line with the fact that Graper Pond is a conservancy. And any modifications to draw the pond down further or at a more rapid rate is not something that we would support.
If I could add a little explanation regarding the 904, and in reference to what's considered that old levee as the historical. I went back to the USGS report written by Leo House, and he makes no mention of a levee being there. And he instead, at that time, that was in 1989, when that study was done, there was no higher berm there at that time. It was only the natural divide that separated Graper Pond from the Pheasant Branch Watershed. And, that is in the same area as where the current higher berm has been constructed, in 1994. But the natural divide is also at 904 feet. So that is what should be considered as the long-term divide or separation between Graper Pond and the Pheasant Branch watershed. And on the 1994 plat, that's perfectly visible there from the contour lines. The berm, the 1994 berm shows up on that plat, but right next to it, you can also see where the natural divide would be coming off that little mounded hill and the hillside to the north, which is right at 904 feet. So I think, that's why the 904 should be considered as the long-term elevation there.
I think we got an agreement pretty much. What I hear is that we should keep the elevation set at 904 or 904.2, whatever. Eric, what would that mean as far as our design is concerned? We have an outlet at 904. How would that work?
I think it could work the same, essentially. Plans need to be modified. I think maybe more importantly, it's if we're going to phrase this or consider it as a return to prior conditions, then kind of all of the permitting discussions that we've had so far could be rehashed quite a bit to get this through.
So how would the plans from MSA have to be modified? That would not be gated. It would just be an outlet pipe.
Well, there's a few things to consider for MSA to consider. The way it was set up before, the pipe was set a little bit lower so that you could develop, full discharge through the 18-inch pipe relatively quickly as the water level rose. If you wanted to do something similar with no valves, nothing adjustable, no low flow. And then I think what I'm hearing from Jim was also no bypass system through Misty Valley.
Right.
It would be a decent bit of work, I would say.
So we have to go back to MSA and have a revised plan.
I think that's what Rich's recommendation is. Yes. There's also the other thing here. I just like to take a step back. I see there's two issues, and I don't think anybody's necessarily arguing about the issues. One is trying to reduce the flood elevations in Graper Pond, which, if you want, the current project could be simplified to just that one element. And the second issue is, the impacts to the Conservancy and the downstream creek itself. And to me, to make that more palatable for everybody, it may be wiser to manipulate the elevation in Graper a little bit to give ourselves some more flood control capacity for it. But I'll leave that up to you guys. And also the upcoming project that Gary had tried to get through, which involved rehabbing the Misty Valley system. There's probably some good opportunity there to enhance infiltration, and I don't know what the long-term plans the Friends have for continuing restoration and improvement upstream of the Conservancy, but maybe 20 years from now, all of that work ends up extending all the way to the Ziegler property that that property owner is also complaining about increased flow. But I don't want anybody to lose sight that I think the city has a responsibility to try to return the Graper outlet to where it was historically, so they're not negatively impacting the property owners directly adjacent to Graper. And if we can come to agreement on that elevation, everything probably gets a lot more simple.
Yeah, I think we got an agreement to operate at 904 and not having a manual control on it, and let operate as a prairie pothole, which means we essentially pass inflow, except for some storage we might have if the pond's drawn down by evaporation or infiltration. So we might have some incremental storage or flood reduction because of that, but not a manual control. Jim, do you have
there's a lot of stuff going on here, and I can appreciate how complicated this gets right away. I don't know the numbers if 904 has keeps the water off the current boardwalk elevation or not. I don't know if anybody has those numbers handy.
Gary said it did.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll trust that. The other thing we saw today, I didn't, again, I'm learning along with the rest of us here, is that it seems to me that Misty Valley complex has opportunities to enhance some stormwater management capabilities at that point to downstream. There's just a lot of, well, that's a complicated, convoluted system out there. And I thought there were opportunities to, maybe enhance infiltration, although right now there's not much infiltration going on. The ground hasn't rained here for what, for a month, 6 weeks? And, that water's, the soil's saturated right to the surface in those basins. So the groundwater, that tells me the groundwater is right at the surface now. There's not much infiltration that can occur under that situation. But to me, the Misty Valley, and this is a question, I believe it's a city-owned and operated system, right? All the various structures and detention out there.
That's correct.
And it seems like I know this is a whole different topic, and I don't want to digress too far here, but it seems like I know there's a RFP coming out to dredge a couple of those basins, but I'm just wondering if it's time to take a bigger picture look at that Misty Valley situation. Is there some other enhancements that could be done, increasing storage, improving management in that system to help protect downstream also east of High Road?
I think it's a good idea, Jim, but that is a separate topic. As long as we direct outflow from Graper Pond to Misty Valley, right?
Right. Yep. Yes. That hasn't changed, or I'm not changing my thoughts on that.
So what we need tonight then is a motion to direct MSA to prepare a contract amendment. Is that right, Eric or Rich?
Yep, you're correct.
And to put the outlet elevation at bottom of the pipe at 904.
Passive berm pipe outlet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a clarifying question, please?
Sure, Eric.
So we've talked about 904 being the runout elevation, and I think Eric Sorensen touched on this a little bit, but you can imagine a pipe with an elevation of 904 at the invert. It's only going to have capacity as that pipe fills up. Sometimes what we do is we put a weir in front of it, and then we drop the invert of the pipe lower, so the weir controls the runout elevation.
Mm-hmm.
And then as the water gets higher, that pipe fills up faster, and so you have more capacity. Is that on the table, or are we talking about strictly a piped outlet?
That idea sounds good to me.
I was thinking, Eric, you're talking like a standpipe type situation, a culvert with a lip at 904. And
that's a variant of it, but yes.
Yeah, I was thinking something like that, as opposed to a berm, just with the other way would just be a berm with an armored spillway at 904.
I think you could present that in your plan, Eric, when you as an option, I guess, with that.
Oh, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure because it obviously changes how we lay the pipe out.
Yeah,
Yeah,
You probably want to keep it piped so you're not flowing across the recreational path, Warren. In
That was
periods
one of my
high
thoughts
water.
too, to get that culvert in there so that we're not overtopping the pathway.
if we do that, there still has to be a spillway at some elevation, right? Above that, let's say the lip of the culvert, lip of the upright stilling basin, or I'm not using the right word, standpipe. So
That's true, but so I think the path is higher than 904, or where it would have to cross the path at some point.
all right,
Also.
okay.
So, there's a few different ways to do it.
I understand. Yes, I agree.
okay, we're looking for a motion then.
So the motion is for MSA to prepare an amendment, design amendment for a passive outlet structure with a maximum elevation of 904.00. Is that what we're shooting for here? I know we
Yeah.
tossed around 904.2 and 904. I don't know if it makes any difference, but
No, probably 904 invert elevation, right?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion's carried. So I don't think we have to do any more on that.
I'm sorry, Warren, did you second that?
Potter did, right, Ken?
Yeah, I can't hear him at all, but I got it. Thank you.
Okay. So last item then is airport firework display. And a citizen just raised that issue to me about she had heard that fireworks were planned this summer at the airport for a fly-in. And she had some concerns about perchlorates and other toxic metals that are fallout from fireworks. And so found several articles on that, which I think you all received, one being from Mount Rushmore, the USGS did a study and found that in groundwater and surface water, they found exceeding drinking water standards. So there is an area of concern on that. I'm not a water chemist, so I really don't know. And we talked about this before. I'm not sure where to proceed from here or who we should notify about it. I did send you an article about, or at least Rich did, that I found in why Madison moved the fireworks from Warner Park. And one of the concerns was fallout, debris from fireworks, and perchlorates and other toxic metals. So I think there is a water quality problem, water quality concern.
Yeah.
The firework would fall probably on the wetlands next to the airport. Does anybody have any ideas about this, what we should do?
I'm in the same boat, Warren. I'm ignorant on it. On the surface, it does sound like not a very great idea to year to be pumping this stuff into our water system. I'm not sure if this is a one-time event, I'm not sure you could demonstrate water quality impacts. But again, I just don't know enough about it.
How does it degrade? Does it degrade over time?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Ken.
I don't know. Does that pollutant degrade? How much? What's the life of that? I realize we're talking about a one-shot deal, but I'm just curious about what would be the long-term implication?
What I heard is it's probably, I'm not sure about this yet. It might be an annual event, so it's not like one time.
Yeah, and my question is, does that pollution degrade? Does it accumulate and then become more toxic with time, or does it degrade in the environment?
Did you read that report from Mount Rushmore? I didn't see any discussion about degrading in there at all. The one thing I thought about is if they go ahead and do it, if the city approves it, and I'm not sure where it has to go. You probably know better than me, Dan. What's the next step they have to take? They
Well,
have to go-
yeah, they'll have to come to L&O to get a permit, then it'll have to go to the council. And then the question will come up, you know, if once you bring this up, then you start to look at the other places where there are fireworks, and you know, Middleton High School has them.
Yeah.
And that borders the Conservancy lands.
Yeah.
I believe that, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that Kiva has had them once or twice over the years. So, I mean, it kind of opens up a whole Pandora's box of different, you know, different organizations. So, I mean, is the airport that much different than the effects, having fireworks at the airport that much different than having fireworks at the high school?
Probably not. I guess at the airport, there's the wetland next to it, and it's right on the stream. But the high school, if they shoot them up over the, it's going to get into the stream too. I don't know.
We've been doing these fireworks for many decades, right, all over the country, and I just wonder, do we know anything about how that's affected health in any way? Is it all, you know, just guessing?
Yeah, Ken, I'm looking at the USGS study here, and it's mainly metals that they're listing off as, you know, as the contaminants: copper, aluminum, zinc, you know, lead, barium, iron. So, you know, the metals are gonna either bind up or, you know, they're not gonna degrade per se, I don't think.
I agree, but they're not soluble though, so.
One thing I thought of, if the city allows it or approves it, number one, we should make at least the common council aware that there possibly is a problem with environment as far as water quality, since it came to our attention. So at least they would have that knowledge. And if it is approved, one thing we could do is we have a water quality sampler there on the North Fork. We could obtain water quality samples at base flow during the event, and then after the runoff event to see if there are any wash off or any degradation or any of those pollutants getting into the stream. And I asked USGS if they would do that, and they said they would, but they'd have to be reimbursed for cost, of course. And Todd never got back to me how much it would be, though I heard from Judy Horwith out there, like she heard that metals are like $60 per metal per sample. So it could be pretty expensive. You're probably talking a couple $1,000 at least.
Well, I don't think from a practical standpoint that the fireworks at the airport or Kiva or the high school are probably any comparison to the fireworks that they have at Mount Rushmore.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's a total, I got to believe that there's a hugely different degree of not only size and number, but frequency also.
That's probably true, but it might be spread over a bigger area too. So I don't know.
Is there any literature? Is there any literature on the? Has it ever been demonstrated that it's caused health problems anywhere in the world? That's, I don't know. Somebody will at least do a little Google search on whether what about the health.
I guess I'd like to hear perhaps an inquiry of the city of Madison. I mean, they were doing it at Warner Park for a couple decades, right? And that was a pretty extensive program. Now, I don't know if they have any evidence of any kind of measurements out there of material or metals. I'd like to be easy enough to just ask the question.
I think they were doing that at Warner Park for like 40 years.
Yeah.
We also
Yeah.
moved stuff over the lake, right? They were doing.
They did it for a few years on off of John Nolan there. Yeah.
So they're putting it right in the lake.
That's a
Yeah,
bad
they were shooting
idea.
right, they were shooting them right from the lake, if I remember right.
Yeah, on a barge. Yeah, and there's debris that comes down. You know, we've all been under fireworks. You get material, parts of the shell fall to the ground. You know.
Sure.
Valuable, are they? So that's I guess I just don't know on this.
I don't want them in the water.
Well, the debris would be falling in the wetland and it would accumulate over time too. It's not just a one-shot deal if they do it on an annual basis.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we don't do anything, the city council doesn't know we even talked about it, do they, Dan?
No, well, we can make it. Rich will put it in the minutes here, and when it comes up for conversation at LNO and the council, we can put in that packet. We can put the excerpt of these minutes.
Okay, I guess that would be good. What would this be an issue that sustainability might want to look at? Dan, do you think that they would have any interest in looking at something like this?
I don't know for sure.
I'm not sure what topics they really do address.
No, I think it's probably more of a water issue, but
Yeah, too.
Yeah, I think they're more into the power and recycling side of things.
I guess the plan at Moore Airport is to have a big celebration where a bunch of planes fly in, and then they do part of the celebration, they shoot off fireworks.
the entirety of the plan has not been contrary to everything that we've heard. The entirety of the plan has not been approved yet.
Okay, but that is the concept, right?
Yeah, that is a concept.
And they're doing it,
But
obviously. Is it a way of celebration or making money?
It's a community event. Part of it is fundraiser for a charity. A way to, I'm sure a way to advertise the business. I don't think that the debate here really is, what is it for? Like I said, we have the high school that does it, we have Kiva that's done it, and now the airport that wants to do it. I think that our role in this particular commission is to say whether or not we believe that it is a hazard to the water table. I mean, what you're talking about with the other stuff is more of a permitting or a political question.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an area of concern, and at least they ought to know that we talked about it.
I'll email the city of Madison, just ask if they've got any information on issues out at Warner Park.
Could you forward that then, Jim, to me?
Do you want me to copy you directly on it, or just?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great, so I could get the response.
Okay.
Caroline, have you heard any discussion in Madison about Lake Minnow or anything going on?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess there's anything outside of you're going to put something in the minutes, Rich, and you could pass them by me before look them over.
Yep, I'm more than happy to do that.
Okay. And Eric, you're going to take over the meetings from the future then?
I believe that's the plan. Yes, Warren.
Okay.
That was a requirement in your hiring, right?
It was in the job description.
Rich wrote that in there very quickly, I think.
Oh, I don't mind. This is an education.
You're doing a great job. So
not part of the agenda, but I mentioned several meetings ago that I was thinking about writing a paper for stormwater, and Jim suggested I go ahead and do that. I think and submit an abstract, and I did, and I got approval for submitting a paper. I also submitted an abstract to their conference they're having over in Milwaukee in September, and
That's right.
I got approval for that too. So are you still part of the board on Jim and stormwater?
Not for that group, no. I'm on another, the Water Environment Federation, so is Caroline, but I'm not on the stormwater one.
So you wouldn't be going to the conference?
Likely not. I don't know.
How
Likely
about you,
not.
Caroline?
Caroline, are you going to StormCon? No.
No.
No,
Well,
no.
okay, well, we'll see how it goes. Is there any other comments or anything? If not,
There's a hand up, Warren.
pardon?
Mr. White has his hand up.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, I just have a quick question. I'm a Century Harbor homeowner, and there's a planned concept development in the concept stage next to our development in the former Captain Bill site. And I'm on a committee with Century Harbor and volunteered to plug into this meeting, and I participated or listened in on the Stormwater Utility Board meeting earlier. And I'm just wondering what this commission's roles or other commissions' roles are in developments. It's a planned apartment development as has been presented to the Planning Commission. And I just wanted to see if I could get some insight as to what this commission or other commissions' roles might be in those types of developments.
Well, I think our role would be to, after the plans or preliminary plans are presented, that we would look for conformance to our ordinance. So I think that would be our role as far as I could see.
Yes.
I might jump in here, Warren. The role of the water resources is sometimes after the plan has been through the Dane County plan review to see if it meets compliance with the stormwater ordinances that are in place for the city of Middleton. Only time things come here is if it doesn't meet that and they're looking for an exception or something out of the ordinary or extraordinary to be implemented on the site. There's an enhancement or something of that nature.
And that's true, but quite often we give a pre or concept approval too.
Yes.
So if business development has a concept and some plans put together, we may give a pre-approval for that.
Okay. Okay, and the ordinance you're referring to, is that City Middleton ordinance or is that county level ordinance?
It's a city of Middleton ordinance that is pretty much in line with the county ordinance with some smaller tweaks to it that are not substantive.
Okay. Okay, does the commission ever perform any studies or have studies performed on stormwater impact related to developments?
Well, we support the monitoring that USGS has been doing for several decades. It's not a site-specific monitoring effort. It's more of a system measurement of impacts of land development. It's showing impacts of land development on our Pheasant Branch system. That's one example anyway.
Okay.
But not, I'm sorry, Warren, speak.
Well, we have supported studies like looking at the North Fork to see areas where we could find a reduction in flood peaks or reducing phosphorus or sediment runoff. So those broader type studies we do for specific business, we probably wouldn't do one.
Okay.
The ordinance does make sure that it meets the requirements of the stays on for redevelopment. They really don't get to increase the runoff at all. They have to take care of it all on site. So it doesn't necessarily impact the greater area.
Okay.
But you probably should refer to the ordinance. It's pretty detailed.
Sure. Sure. Well, I appreciate the comments. I know you guys are busy and have a lot of things to discuss, so I appreciate the input.
Okay,
Why
Yeah,
don't you call me,
Yeah.
offline?
Okay,
Department of
Thank-
Public Works,
sure. Thank you, Eric.
Eric Sorensen.
Yep,
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah, I was going to suggest that, Eric. Thanks for volunteering.
okay, do we have a motion for quitting? Or just quit? Or adjournment?
We're not gonna quit. We need this group.
I quit.
Move to adjourn.
All in favor of me quitting? That's fine. Move to adjourn. You got a second?
Second.
All in
Second.
favor?
Go ahead. Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, everyone. Thank you.
Then you take the puppy out to pee.
There you go.
Time to take me out to pee.
Thanks, everybody.
All I
Thanks,
got to
Rich.
say, Jim, is piddle, piddle, piddle.